I'm Amirak Delat, creator of Words and Sand, and you're listening to the True North Country Comics podcast.
Welcome to the True North Country Comics podcast, dedicated to promote Canadian comic book creators and supporters. It's June 7th, 2021. I'm John Swinimer. If you want to drop me a line, you can contact me at john@truenorthcountrycomics.com. On this episode, I chat with Amirak Delat about Words and Sand. This podcast is available on Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts. It's also available on the True North Country Comics channel on YouTube. I invite you to like and subscribe. Amirak is a comic artist and illustrator based in Canada. Comics, illustration, and storytelling have been her passion since a young age. At the age of 19, Amirak made the decision to move out from home to study fine arts in Montreal and become a comic book artist. Since been a bumpy ride to get to where she is today, a self-employed artist, but she's self-published 2 graphic novels, Ad Infinitum and Words and Sand, plus she's collaborated with writers on a variety of projects. Other than making art for a living, one of Amirak's other missions is to also help out and empower creatives to become financially successful. Her blog, The Financial Creative, gives useful, practical advice for creatives on budgeting, building a solid personal finance plan, and getting started with investing as an artist. Words and Sand explores the themes of identity, self-acceptance, friendship, and travel. Amirak said she is inspired by the history of her country of origin and her childhood in Algeria during the Civil War in the 1990s. During the writing process, she said she felt a deep personal connection to the story and its protagonists. And so, without further ado, here's my chat with Amirak Delat about Words and Sand. So, Amirak Delat, thank you very much for taking time to chat with me.
Thank you, John. I'm so glad to be here.
Yeah, it's wonderful. What I normally do to start off the interview is ask the creator about their first comic book. So, wondering if you remember, what was the first comic book that you read?
I believe I remember, I think I started when I was 6 or 7. And I was an immigrant kid who, so basically I was born in Algeria and we moved to Canada when I was 7. And I remember not really having a lot of friends when I, being here in a country where I couldn't really speak the language and I tried to learn French. So I thought comics were really an easy way to learn French, but also I found that they were a way to just escape. And the first comic I read was The Adventures of Tintin.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I think it also kind of sparked my interest for travel. And I'm also an avid traveler. So it did spark 2 things. It sparked my love for comics, but also for travel. So, yeah.
Oh, very good. Yeah, it's a good choice for sure. So with that in mind, I'm wondering who or what influences your work today?
Today, I would say it's kind of a mix. I'm influenced by comics, but I'm also influenced by movies and books. So I would say in terms of comics, Moebius is probably my first. And then I love Marc-Antoine Mathieu, who is a French cartoonist. And in terms of movies, I'm kind of influenced by more intimate types of movies. I love Sofia Coppola's movies because they really focus on the character's journey along the story. Like
Lost in Translation?
Yes.
Yeah, I was just watching that last night.
One of my favorites. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Great film.
It's perfect. And I would say in terms of writers, I love Alan Moore. And in terms of books, it's kind of I read a little bit of a lot of the mystery and crime types of novels. So Agatha Christie she's my favorite of all time. I'm obsessed with all of the Hercule Poirot novels. I've read all of them. I probably read them twice each. So,
wow.
yeah. So, yeah, those are my influences.
Very good. Very good. So we're here talking about your latest project, Words and Sand. So I wonder if you could tell a little bit about that series and maybe the origins of the project as well.
Yeah, so it was a very interesting um, way that I think the story almost found me as much as I found that story. So I think I was going through a very rough patch in my life a few years ago when I was kind of in conflict in terms of career and life and everything. And one day I was just like, I woke up very early because I couldn't sleep, and I started watching this documentary about Algeria. And I
Wow.
was born in Algeria, but I never really came back ever since I moved from the country. And I watched that documentary that was just like about the scenery
Mm-hmm.
um, of the country, and I felt so inspired, and I feel like this just prompted some kind of, I don't know, a story in my head about a man who travels to Algeria to find his grandfather. And and so that's where it came in my head all of a sudden, just watching that. And I think there's a little bit of autobiography in that story
Mm-hmm.
because it's kind of based on my own childhood in Algeria because I grew up during that time. And also the grandfather in that story is kind of like based on my own grandfather who and that's why I dedicated that graphic novel to him.
Nice.
So yeah, so that's how I came up with that, and I started writing a bunch of drafts. And in 2020, I finished the final draft, and I completed all of the illustration in 1 year while working full time. It was
Wow.
quite a challenge, but I felt like I needed to finish it, and I think COVID-19, being stuck at home and everything, kind of forced me to say, well, you know what, it's now and never or never. So I just, I don't know, I had like a bunch of energy, and maybe I was just trying to avoid thinking about the pandemic and everything. So I just focus all of my attention into this comic in a
Oh.
way to just cope, I guess. But yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know a lot of creators I've been talking to have used this time to get their nose to the grindstone, so to speak, to accomplish tasks and get projects done. So I'm glad you're able to focus on that. I know it's very difficult for many people to focus on one thing in this time, but I'm glad you're able to do that. So that's great.
Yeah.
So I want to switch gears just a bit and talk about the tools that you use to create your art. I wonder if you could talk me through all the various process that you have to create your artwork.
So usually, what I do, and I don't do that for all of the pages, but usually I start with the drawing, the illustration part, at least for the lining on paper, and I scan it, and then I finish the coloring on Photoshop. And
Mm-hmm.
recently, I started using Procreate because I just got an iPad, and I felt like I needed to. I felt like it's really hard to use a tablet sometimes with a computer. So I found that I work much faster with the iPad. But yeah, that's usually how I work, and I do use some reference images to help me, especially when I'm drawing more complicated items like cars or
Mm-hmm.
things like that. They're
Right.
not super easy to draw, so yeah.
How was it transition moving over to the Apple Pencil? Were you able to get as much out of it as you would have liked?
Honestly, I was really scared because I would read so many comments and reviews online saying that, oh, like the Apple Pencil is not really that great compared to the Wacom
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
pencil that you use with like a regular tablet. But honestly, I didn't really find any difference. But maybe it's just me, and maybe I don't, the type of work I do is not as detail oriented. Like I don't really do paintings per se. It's really illustration. So maybe if I was doing paintings, I would notice that difference more. But it's not really the case for me. I don't really do that much concept art and things like that. So, but in my case, I found that drawing comics on the iPad is much more easier, and it's just much more faster. I get to finish a page faster than usual. The only drawback is that the fact that I can easily zoom in, zoom out. Sometimes I get lost in the details of a
Right.
one panel. So
Mm-hmm.
I guess, yeah, so I have to learn to really just like step back and try to see the bigger picture.
Ah, very good. Very good. Well, I'm glad it's working out for you, that's for sure. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so I normally ask creators about advice for others who are making their own comic book, but I noticed on your site you have a blog called The Financial Creative. So I wanted to dig into that a little bit more. What is that all about, and how does that why is that advantageous for someone to be focused on that as they're doing their creating their books?
Well, I started noticing. Well, first of all, I I used to work in finance just before quitting my job recently and really moving into a more 100% full time artist career. And while I was working, I noticed that around me, like the people I knew who were artists or creatives, had some kind of gap in terms of financial literacy and knowledge about how to manage their finances. And I found that it just stemmed from if some kind of a fear or weird misconceptions about money and finance in general. And I think the fact that I was lucky to work in that environment and actually um, encounter people who were able to have some kind of financial cushion and they were able to be financially stable. If anything would happen to them, they would be okay in terms of finances. But it wasn't really the case for many creatives who were around me, and from what I saw online is that they didn't really know how to manage their own money, and sometimes it just comes from I guess, being intimidated by the word finance. And I thought it's kind of unfair because I think it's something that everybody has the right to know. You know, being financially literate, it's something that school does not teach people, and it's something that fine art schools do not teach artists. Um, and it's so important because we are basically entrepreneurs. We are managing a business, an art business. And it's really important that we have some kind of financial cushion when we do that and that we're making decisions that are financially um, feasible, or at least that would make sense in terms of our personal life and lifestyle. So that's why I started the Financial Creative, because I was like, well, I mean, I have all of this knowledge about finance and I want to be an artist, but I don't want to just be an artist. I want to be able to also support artists and be able to elevate them and empower them to also be financially stable and even be financially successful, because they can too. Everybody can. It doesn't mean that you're an artist or versus like being a doctor or a dentist. It doesn't mean that you cannot be financially stable. Everybody can. And I think it really just comes from having the knowledge.
Yeah, that's very good advice for sure. I know that I can't speak for every creative person out there, but I know that 9 times out of 10, when you say to your parents, I'm going to go off and be a writer or I'm going to go draw comics, they'll say, there's no money in that. So I think the fear factor is there from the very outset. So I think what you're trying to get across, I think, makes perfect sense. As you said, the creators are entrepreneurs, just like anyone starting their own business, and they need to follow those sorts of rules and make sure they understand where they're going. So I get where you're coming from. That's a great idea.
Exactly. Yeah.
For sure. So we talked about Words and Sand, but I wonder if you could talk about what's coming up next for you. What do you have coming down the road that you can talk about?
Yeah, so I'm actually continuing working on a continuation of Words and Sand. So I just finished illustrating the 5th chapter of the comic. So it should be out in the next few weeks. In terms of conventions, I kind of like missed my chance with a bunch of them recently. I think I've missed the TCAF, and I recently just missed the version from Montreal. So I'm trying to see if I can get into the Montreal Comic Con in July, but I don't know if it's gonna work out. So I guess we'll see. But I'm not too in a rush, because I know with the COVID and all of the different rules that keep changing, I don't know if those will even take place in person or not, or if they will even like take place at all this year. I guess we'll see. But in terms of comics, I'm also collaborating with writers right now with different comic book projects. So I'm collaborating with Pat Loika. So he's working on he's a writer for a comic book series that I don't want to mention the title, but it's been a very interesting project so far, and I'm really excited to share it. Yeah, that's pretty much it. So hopefully, I don't know what will happen with Words and Sand, but in terms of how I'll be, I guess, distributing it, because right now it's only available on Amazon. So I guess we'll see for the next chapters. They will probably still be available on Amazon and Comixology, but I guess we'll see in the future if it gets more popular, hopefully, with the conventions, because I didn't really get the chance to really put it out there in the public. If right now it's only been available online, so it's really hard to promote a comic 100% online.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is a challenge for sure. But I'm 100% certain if we're patient enough, the festivals and conventions will come back. So that's something we can look forward to for sure.
Fingers crossed.
Yes, that's it. So with that in mind, I wonder if you could tell people where they can find out more about you, about your current and future projects, where they can find you online.
Yeah, so usually my website at amirakdelat.com, you can find all of the different links to view my comic, and I'll also read the different blog posts I've made for the Financial Creative. And on social media, I'm mostly active on Twitter and a little bit on Instagram. And right now I'm also on YouTube under the Financial Creative playlist. So if you are interested in trying to learn how the basics of finance really catered to artists and creatives, you can check that out. And yeah, so those are the main. And I'm also trying to dabble with TikTok these days. I find that it's a very good platform for artists, because it's a very easy and fast way to get your art and also your personality out there, and reach a lot of people. So yeah.
Thanks to Amirak for the chat. You can discover more about Amirak on Twitter and Instagram at AMIRAKDELAT and online at amirakdelat.com. And thanks to you for listening to the True North Country Comics podcast. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to and like this podcast on Apple Podcasts. And please leave a good rating. Also check out the TrueNorthCountryComics.com website and follow on Twitter at True North Comics. True North Country Comics is now on YouTube. Please like and subscribe to that video channel. Please send your feedback to John at TrueNorthCountryComics.com. Thanks again for listening, and come back soon for another episode. Bye for now. True North Country Comics Podcast is copyright True North Country Comics, copyright 2021.